from the outside, you feel this terrible pity for them, that they're lost in this awfulness that has essentially no meaning. Panic attacks are generally meaningless. The person is frightened of something that is actually not very frightening. There are plenty of things to be frightened of in the world. If I was living in Kabul, I'd be scared shitless all the time. But if you're living in a place like this, you've got a few things to worry about, even if you lose your job. These things can be managed in some way. There's some degree of safety net. But when somebody gets into a panic attack, it is as if it's the end of the world. I'm going to fall unconscious, it's going to be terrible, I'm going to die. This is a confectionery. It's like candy floss. A few little specks of sugar are heated up and spun around, and this great cloudy stuff you get in the stick in the fair. That's what these sort of thoughts are. There's very little substantial basis to the worry, but going into the amplifying accelerator of one's own habitual thinking, it gets all fluffed up, like beating egg white. That's because the person can't ground themselves in the world. So, this second aspect of interdependence, or often translated from Buddhist texts as dependent co-origination, means essentially there is no real difference between subject and object. Although we live inside this skin bag and we feel ourselves to be inside it, our skin is connected with the world. It's both a kind of border with its guards to keep us safe, but it's also a bridge out into the world because we're continuously picking up information. And because of that, when we're reasonably healthy and attuned to what's going on, we're going to be touched and moved. And this is probably the joy of life, isn't it? It's pretty awful when you can't be touched and moved. That's usually the first sign of depression, that it's as if there's a muffling zone between you and the world. And when you start to feel more in yourself, you get it. Things get through to you, and you go out to what's there. In Buddhist language, this is also described as non-duality. It means that the dualism of saying, I live inside my skin bag, I have access to the world which is not me, there's self and other as two radically distinct categories, is actually an illusion. Now, I can decide I'm going to get up and walk out the door. I have two legs which are still working, so I'm able to do that. In that sense, I'm not you, because if I stand up, you guys don't necessarily stand up. So we could say on an ordinary level, it's obvious self and other are different. And yet, how I am is brought into being by the nature of the other. So the conversation that you might have with your friend in a cafe is going to be very different from the conversation you have if you're sitting in the consulting room with a client. You're the same person. Why is it different? Because you're in a role. You have role-determined behavior. Some things that you might think, but you wouldn't say if you're the therapist. However, also, if you're in the cafe, some of the things you could say as a therapist, you wouldn't say to your friend. So it cuts both ways. There's freedoms in both directions. What is a role? It's a way of mediating connectivity. It's part of the choreography of how people interact. Wouldn't that be right? So, when are we not in role? Even when you're walking, say, by yourself, you go off and walk on the hills, the thoughts that you have are about people and places. These have to do with roles. That is to say, they are particularized formations. What the subject appears to be in any particular moment will constellate the object in a similar kind of way. Does that make sense? So if you were, for example, if you say you get pissed off with your boss at work and you feel, I don't know, scorned or put down in some ways, and it rankles, sort of moving around inside you, you can't let go of it. when you're walking and you get into that state, your image of your boss that's arising in your mind, the person you're tussling with, is a very diminished sense of who that boss is, because they have a huge arc of activity, not just in how they are in the work, and you've seen them in different ways, but also in their lives. But in the moment that we're really pissed off with them, this is what they are, I've got them, I know, and we are also trapped, so you get that incredible lock-on. And one possibility of observing ourselves in this way is to see that from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, there is a ceaseless movement of particularized shapings or positionings of ourselves with a concordant shaping of the other. That as I take myself, so I take the other. And as I take the other, so I'm taking myself. Does that make sense? So all the different moods that we go through, the different ways that we think, serve to act as kind of lenses or ways of slicing up the world. And we find ourselves then with a kind of continuity that it's my life and I'm me, but the content of ourselves is changing all the time. So our, if you like, our ingredients or our contents are unreliable, unpredictable and changing, and yet we talk as if there is a continuity of self. We make lots of statements of I'm going to, just like children say, well, at Christmas, this is what I'm going to get. Little children don't have too much power about what Santa Claus is going to bring them, but they get very, very determined, having watched all this crap on the telly, this is exactly what I'm going to get. And we as adults have the same. We don't know what the economy is going to do. We don't know whether we'll be able to hang on to the kind of lifestyles we might have built up. There's a lot that's up for grabs. And yet, we want to be agents who can make a mark. So, interdependency or codependency or co-emergence, you could describe this in various ways, is pointing to the fact that there isn't a fixed stability in ourselves moment by moment. That is to say, there is an absence of any solidity in our sense of self and in the objects of the world. That they are fundamentally constructs. In Buddhist languages it's called emptiness. So, for example, here's a watch. It's not just a watch, it's my watch. So I am adding my to this watch. And if you decide to take this watch, I will say, excuse me, that's my watch. The minus of my watch is not in the watch. This is a watch. If I needed some money and I had to go to the pawnbroker, it would just be a watch in the window and someone could buy it. But it's my watch, okay? So I'm projecting my onto this object. That's a movement coming from my mind. I feel entitled to do it because it was my hard-earned dosh that bought the damn thing. So it's my watch. But that's a name that's being stuck onto it. Someone else could have bought it and they would then be calling it their watch. And they'd be quite entitled to do that. The minus seems to be inherent in the watch. When I look at it, it's mine. Or if we'd left our shoes at the door, you'd go out and you'd recognise your own shoes. These are my shoes. You bought them in a shop. At that time they were shoes. Then they were shoes I like. Then they were shoes that can fit me. Then they were shoes I can afford to buy. And then they're my shoes. And it's very interesting to observe that movement into identification. Children of 3 and 4 tend to be somewhat obsessed by this, about what's mine and what's not mine, who can play with my toys and so on. Because it's an amazing thing, isn't it? To see something outside yourself as yours. And in their conversations they're often saying, Mummy, Mummy, Dad, Dad, because they're wanting to kind of assert, you are linked to me. I have access to you, and if I say, Mummy, you have to stop and turn around and be with me, you don't have a choice. So I'm dependent on something which is not me, but only by really asserting it is me and taking it for granted can I feel secure, which is one of the difficult things sometimes in being a parent, that you have to accept that the child needs to take you for granted, and that when you do things for the child, they have no interest in saying thank you. Teaching children to say please and thank you is completely artificial, because the child needs to feel entitled. And one of the reasons they're feeling entitled is that they are projecting the happiness of their life, the security of their life, out into something outside themselves, outside their skin bag. And they need to then be damn sure that that outsideness is so linked to them that they will always have immediate access. Is that linked with your experience? And we do the same. We do it with our watches, with cars, with jobs, and so on. We feel that this is mine. At the moment, in the hospital where I work, we're going through another reorganisation, and we'll have to apply for our jobs and so on. And I've been with some colleagues in a little department for about 20 years now. And we keep talking about our department. It's not ours at all. We have no rights at all over this. And we need to keep remembering this when we meet management, because otherwise we become very emotional. They're trying to destroy our world. But it was never our world. It's a world that belongs to the NHS. We have always been squatters in someone else's world. We have very little in the way of rights. You get a bit through employment law. But we feel it's our department. We have all these memories. The managers haven't been there. They haven't done it. We've done it. It's ours. But it's not. That's an illusion. So that form of attachment, the fantasy that somehow I have an ownership, a sense of my domain in the world, and therefore rights over it, and therefore the right to maintain the predictability of that situation, is one which can bring us a lot of grief. Because actually, it's revealed to us again and again, that's not true. Divorce rate in Britain is between 40 and 50%. People come together, they're together for a while, then they break up. That brings a lot of pain for them, for the kids and so on. But security is very difficult to achieve. We don't know what's inside our bodies. We could go for some test and suddenly we've got some very difficult disease. How we thought our life would be can suddenly be reconfigured by this information. There is no solidity in anything. Solidity is a fantasy created by our own projection. Our way of dealing with our anxiety is to try to make the earth, the world, more stable. So a traditional way of thinking about this would be to think of the 5 elements, where we have earth, water, fire, wind, and space. The 3 middle elements, the water, the fire, and the wind, are clearly very dynamic and moving all the time. Earth seems more solid and secure. And then we've got space, which, although ungraspable, seems to have a continuity to it. It's not fickle in the way that the wind is. Actually, we find ourselves in a moving world. What we experience primarily is like the interplay of water, fire, and wind. Things are changing all the time. Just as if the sunlight comes back, the brightness of it, I'll respond to that. It's fickle, it's undetermined, it can't be predetermined. However, that ungraspability of experience means that unless I find a way of living exactly in the moment of the unfolding of the experience, like if you were playing music, unless you could really kind of be on the beat, or if you're singing in a choir, if you don't kind of get the moment when you have to come in, everything goes off. What have I done? Being in rhythm, being on the point, gives us that sense of belonging. We're not really belonging to anything, but we are in sync. We've synchronized with the flow of events. That's quite difficult to do. That's really what mindfulness is. Being present in the moment as it unfolds, as openly and as fully as possible. However, we don't always stay with that. And when we wobble out of that, we start to get anxiety because we're out of kilter. We're off balance and we can't necessarily get back into the world. You know, when you get an off day and you're thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this anymore. What's the point? That sort of slipping away. It's a dreadful feeling. You can't inhabit your life. Everything, it's like having ashes in your mouth. It's sort of, you can't get back to being yourself. You know, if you could have a little pump and just blow yourself back up, that would be nice, but the spirit has gone. You long to be inspired, to be alive again, but there's just this sort of being less than. And then, of course, we try to hold ourselves together, we try to make something. What this is pointing to is that the movement of the waves, if you're in them, if you're out and you're young and healthy and you're windsurfing, it always looks amazing. There's this zipping along on the crest of the waves. But if you're a tired swimmer in the open sea and you can't see land and the waves are splashing in your face, it's very different. Because then you feel the waves are against you. It's the same with fire. It's good for heating and cooking and so on. But if it's burning your house down, if you're getting sunstroke, it's not much fun. The same with the wind. It can be nice if it's light and it's just blowing things around. But if you're out in a cold place and the wind is relentlessly blowing, like in the Himalayas, it freezes you to the bone. And you want the thing to stop. It's just awful. Like the Sirocco, one of these strong winds that comes down week after week, it starts to drive people crazy. So, how can we stop the horror of this chaotic movement where we can't find our feet anymore? Go to the earth element. Solidify. I'm going to assert my definition of what's going on. I'm going to secure the territory. It's an awful lot of work. It's an awful lot of work. And it's usually not very successful, but it's, from the Buddhist point of view, this is what we spend our lives doing. Traditionally it's called samsara. Samsara means turning and changing. It means unpredictable, unstoppable. And what makes it bad is that we don't get it, that you have to keep moving. We try to stop it and control it. And that's what makes it suffering. So I remember in my primary school, if we were lucky and not too much trouble, the girls would let us join in their skipping games. But the girls were always much better than the boys. And when you get two girls holding the rope and they're going round and round, and you have to get your body into it, and then they do this thing with a double rope, isn't it? But you really, and the thing is, as the rope's coming round, you feel it in your body first, don't you? You see people are going like that, and they're getting in the rhythm. So what they can see is the movement of the rope, or feel from the wind as it's coming round. They're taking the rhythm into the body, and then they're aligned with it, and then it goes okay. And so it's how do you feel the rhythms of the world as something you can participate in. That alignment is complementary in both directions. Both people are fulfilled by getting in the rhythm, rather than feeling that alignment is a terrible imposition, that I am being forced to do something I don't want to do. And again, we can see that when we feel healthier, we're more up for it, that there's a flexibility that goes with feeling okay. And when we have physical but also mental problems, we tend to become more rigid. So that's the earth element, both volitionally in that I want to stabilize what's going on, and also defensively in terms of I've got to hold myself together. That solidification becomes a false way of trying to stay stable and secure in a moving world. The only way to be secure is to move with the world, to be open, to be present with things as they are, as they reveal themselves to be. And none of us can predict the future. Nobody knows what will happen to the euro. Because of that, nobody knows what will happen to the pound. So nobody knows where to put their money. It's just not knowing. That not knowing is not new. When I was a kid, my mum would sometimes talk about being in the war and the bombs that were coming down in Scotland. It was just years and years of not knowing. You never knew at night if the sirens were going to go off. When the bombs were coming down, you didn't know if they would come in your street or someone else's street. There was no way to arm yourself against it. So a great deal of the public relations in the Second World War and a great deal of the stuff that's in the songs was about just, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. You'll be all right. Don't worry. Which is fabulous, isn't it? Because it means don't solidify. You know, it's like if something bad's going to happen and you pull yourself together and tighten all your muscles, if something hits them, you're going to get a very big bruise. But if you stay loose and you get hit and you move with it, you're going to get much less of a mark. But it feels counterintuitive to us. It makes sense to arm yourself against the world. You're being hostile to me, well, I'm not going to let you do that. Rather than moving with the flow and learning to bend and give ground when we can't win and then come back. Because there's a pulsation that, you know, if we look back over our lives, sometimes we've been winning, sometimes we've been losing, and that's gone up and down. And when we were winning, didn't last forever. And when we were losing, didn't last forever either. That could lead us to certain conclusions. That we should be where we are. But how do I do that? I don't want to be where I am. I don't like it. If I give in to these circumstances, I'm going to be annihilated. This is certainly something many of my patients say. That acceptance of how things are would mean defeat, and that only struggle allows them to assert that they're still there. From the Buddhist point of view, this leads us into thinking about, well, what is the nature of the self? If the content of my experience is changing moment by moment, what is it that remains? Since you woke up this morning, I guess you've all had many, many different experiences. Going to the toilet, doing your teas, making a cup of coffee, maybe getting kids to school, whatever it would be. Lots of different things. You've probably talked in different ways to people when you arrive, you had a cup of tea here, and you're chatting with people, some people you know, some people you don't know. Lots of different sensations, feelings have arisen and passed. That's just in a few hours. And it was like that yesterday, and the day before, and the day before. All the days of your life have just been this flow of experience, out of which we generate certain abstract conceptualizations, such as what I like to do, my favorite color, what I like to cook, the names of my friends, and so on. We make patterns and listings which we feel to be enduring, but actually only have meaning if they're activated. Because you might have a friend and think, oh God, I haven't spoken to Nelly for a year. Phone up, you catch up. They tell you some stories about what they've been doing. You tell them some stories about what you've been doing, and you feel connected again. Connected by what? By stories. What are stories? Just abstract confectionaries again. Who is the one who is having that experience? That is to say, does the experiencer have a content? So, I have the experience just now, I'm in the room with you. If I turn this into a story, say I tell someone later, oh, I went to Hereford and I met these people and da-da-da-da-da-da. I, James Lowe, born in Scotland, had this experience. So I can start with some narrative basis. I am who I am. There's history that I can pad on that. From this basis, this is now an account of my experience of being in Hereford. But saying that I was born in Scotland is a storyline. it's a temporary content of the mind. It's passing. To say that I'm male, to say that I'm 60